Right, gonna get started here. Just gonna get Pierre to join.
Hey,
Hey, that was pretty
how's it going?
seamless.
Yeah,
It's
that's a
going good.
first.
How
Doing
are you? How are you doing?
pretty well. How are you? It's
Good,
good to
good.
see you.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah,
Excited
man.
for the holidays here.
Yeah, yeah. What's happening on your end?
Well, I've got a relatively jammed schedule, so it's good.
Yeah,
But yeah, lots of uncertainty going into the holidays. So yeah, we'll try to figure it out as we go along, I guess.
yeah. What do you think the biggest areas of uncertainty are?
Well, I was hoping to travel a little bit more over the holidays, but I
Yeah,
kind of I'm staying fairly local, just heading out to Toronto to visit my siblings, but that's about it. Not leaving the country, just
yeah,
just with how quickly things are changing. So yeah,
yeah, yeah. I think travel of all sorts is a bit challenging these days. I'm staying put.
yeah.
But
Oh,
have
your
traveled
wife?
in back to Houston to visit my niece and nephew and the rest of the family in January, and so I'm sort of holding my breath to see what happens then. And
Right.
David asks, does certainty even exist anymore? Probably not.
Yeah,
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 I suppose the only thing we can be certain of is that things will be uncertain.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, we'll figure it out, I guess,
yeah,
as
man.
we go along, as we have been fairly resilient over the last couple of years. So.
Yeah,
Um,
we
but
have.
very, I think, interesting topic today. For personally for me, I don't know what your thoughts are, Pierre, but I think going into the holiday season, myself, I try to spend a lot of time because it's really the most in terms of being quiet. That's probably this part of time of the year is really quiet for me. It gives me a lot of opportunity to reflect and going into the new year, I don't really believe in resolutions, but I think there is an aspect of starting fresh and kind of focusing on goals or priorities for the new year. But forgiveness is for yourself. Uh, First of all, I think that's where it really starts.
Mhm.
Is key in order to be able to move forward and really be able to live out your life with purpose. But yeah, so I could share my personal reason behind really focusing on forgiveness over the holidays, but wanted to get your thoughts first in terms of how can we navigate this space of forgiving ourselves, and really for the video or the live today, I wanted to talk about some of the reasons why people struggle with forgiving themselves and what their blockers are around that and how they can navigate through some of those barriers in order to be able to forgive themselves and then have that same compassion, grace, forgiveness for others, and then kind of live, I think, more openly and yeah, there's an aspect of freedom that comes with forgiveness. So yeah,
I think so too. I think so too. I think it's an important topic because, um, well, I think many men struggle with forgiving ourselves and even understanding perhaps what that looks like, what that entails. Um, and I know my own experience of self-forgiveness is a challenging one. It's one that I have not mastered, nor do I think I've come close to even mastering, but that perhaps is uh, sets us up to discuss some of the natural challenges that emerge when we try to forgive ourselves. I think my own experience is one of being far more likely to forgive other people than to forgive myself. But when
Mm-hmm.
you're sort of navigate the experience of being both the forgiver and the forgiven, it becomes really murky and challenging to
Mm-hmm.
ascertain how to actually do it
Mm-hmm.
and um, and how to move forward with it. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
think it's a great topic,
Yeah,
especially
absolutely.
leading into the new year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's something to your point, it's a never-ending journey.
Hmm.
Um, okay, I'm just reading Dave's comment here. The stupid neither forgive nor forget. The naive forgive and forget. The wise forgive but do not forget. That's
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that resonates for me. Yeah, in terms of the never-ending journey, and I think for the reason why, primarily for me, going into the holidays, this is a bit of a priority. Is and I think I mentioned it to you when we chatted last week. But I went to
Hmm.
see my therapist last week. It was more of a check in and kind of like making sure things are in good shape, bouncing some things off of her before going into the holidays. And, as many good therapists do, she kind of dropped a nugget right at the end of the session. And, I just joke about it.
Classic.
I'm like, yeah, I'm like, okay, well, here's my credit card. Thank you.
Hmm.
Charge. But, she left me with a question. She asked me, when are you going to forgive yourself? You're doing great work, but when are you going to forgive yourself? And that really hit me home because typically when I go to my sessions, I'm pretty good at being able to talk through things and articulating whatever I'm experiencing or what I would like to, or where I would like to go. But that basically left me speechless because I didn't really have an answer. And the reason
Yeah.
why I didn't have an answer is because it's something I haven't really put much attention to. It's something I've almost avoided because of the fear of the things that may come up, and
Hmm.
and recognizing that that discomfort is there for a reason, and very key in my own healing journey. So I wanted to share some ideas in terms of why people struggle with forgiving themselves. Timely enough, I came across a post from the holistic psychologist, who's
Hmm.
Nicole LaPrera, and she mentioned, and I'm just going to kind of go through a list of reasons why people find it hard to forgive themselves. So they have regrets about things from the past in their life where they wish they would have done things differently. And I think that in itself, I can appreciate that because there was a time in my life where I had regrets. But if you're able to reframe and shift your focus and be able to tell yourself that whatever happened in the past was more of an opportunity to bring you where you are today. But we can kind of like talk through these points. So let's
Hmm.
perhaps talk about this one in terms of regrets and hoping or looking back and saying, oh, I wish I would have done that situation differently. Or I think we need to have a little bit of compassion for ourselves in the sense that we are always trying to do the best we can, or with the amount of information we have. Obviously, there's no instruction manual you get for every situation that, hey, go read this and then apply this, right? So,
Yeah.
anyways, yeah, I think we could be harsh with ourselves because hindsight is truly 2020.
Yeah. So this is where I think I struggle a lot, where I find myself looking back and asking myself, what if I had done something differently? Why couldn't I have done X or Y or differently and showed up in a different way? And I think perhaps part of that is separating the action that's taken from who we are and allowing ourselves the opportunity to look back on the actions taken as just that, actions taken, thoughts had, words said, um, taking responsibility for them, but also recognizing that we can learn from them, choose to take them forward in the same way or in a different way, that ruminating over the past doesn't change the experience that we have in the moment, doesn't change who we are fundamentally. And so I think there's an element of being able to separate ourselves from mistakes in the past. And then I think that begins the process of healing and
Hmm.
self-forgiveness, I suppose. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the next point was, and I kind of following through in terms of what you were saying is this aspect of seeking for perfection, right?
Yeah.
And we as humans, if we're focused on perfection, we tend to punish ourselves when we do fall short of our own expectations. And we often don't recognize where those I mean, if you truly do the work, you can understand. In my case, those standards, expectations were passed down to me by my parents, and on a
Yeah.
subconscious level, I've continued with those expectations. And when I fall short, I'm really hard with myself and I'll punish myself. And punishment doesn't necessarily mean like physical. I think a lot of it is emotional and psychological, where we're just really hard on ourselves and we
Hmm.
have this internal dialogue of self-criticism, which kind of manifests itself in many situations, right? We'll keep repeating that pattern subconsciously without recognizing the source of it and understanding how we can make a change.
Hmm.
But, anyways, passing it on to you in terms of that whole aspect of perfectionism.
Yeah, that's one that really resonates. I think the times when I found myself really beating myself up are times when I expected myself to perform in a way that was absolutely perfect, that was superhuman.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would look back and sort of judge every little imperfection. And perhaps that's led to my inner perfectionist is pretty powerful. He's kind of an asshole. Like if I'm gonna be honest, like there's a bit of this that involves some compassion to our inner critics and also some awareness of the ways in which they can really beat us up,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of separating that from who we are, uh, who we are ourselves, sort of a greater sense of self over these inner parts of us that might lead to criticism. The perfectionist, I think, being one that resonates for many men, especially guys who've sought um, accomplishment and achievement throughout our lives. These are parts of us that innately help us to move forward and do good work, and at the same time tend to also beat us up when we fall short in some way. And my own, I mean, I speak from my own experience around perfectionism, will beat myself up over imperfections that I wouldn't got gauged to be imperfections by anyone else or by my standards for anyone else. And so they might be very, very subtle, but
Mm-hmm.
the response is also really powerful. And so, I think sometimes recognizing even that these parts of us are not innately us, that we're bigger than the sum of these individual parts, one of those parts perhaps being an inner critic, um, becomes really valuable to just being able to isolate and experience from uh, full ownership of shame, which feels dramatically different.
Mm-hmm.
The experience of feeling remorse or guilt over a past action and looking at it and actually being objective around the um, the the repercussions of that action are really very different from completely absorbing the experience into a sense of personal shame. And so I think for me, when I found myself really thinking about navigating this perfectionist in me, being able to recognize that he really grew out of um, pattern, years and years, decades of a pattern of accomplishment to receive love.
Mm-hmm.
And recognizing too that while I experience him as very harsh on me, and I can experience him as kind of an asshole, in many ways, he's also like this scared little boy. And it
Mm-hmm.
becomes a little bit easier to treat him and therefore myself with a little more compassion.
Mm-hmm.
But it's come with years of just digging into how the perfectionist shows up, how I feel when I am judging myself from this perfectionistic view. And usually that is as a scared boy who's made a mistake and doesn't want to hurt someone else, doesn't want to feel unloved, doesn't want to be abandoned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what you're saying is really tapping into that inner child that we all have and understanding what that inner child needs in that moment. Um,
Yeah.
so, a question for you, and I think you kind of touched on it. So, from your perspective, your kind of inner dialogue is self-created or it came from somewhere? Have you been able to figure
Mm.
that out?
No, I think it's I mean, I think it's self-created.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for me, it's a sort of self-talk that I voice from an awareness, a recognition that I would get um, love or bring a sense of pride or a sense of joy to others by doing things in a specific way. And I guess for me growing up, yeah, I think for me growing up, there were tough things happening at home, and that was chronic.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow the best ways in which I received um, or I could bring a sense of joy and pride was to achieve, to accomplish, to not rock the boat, to not show up as somehow troublesome or too
Mm-hmm.
much. And so I found myself then developing these patterns. Sure, there were some there's some reinforcement of those patterns by
Of course.
parents or family members, but really that inner dialogue is sort of my own design. It's
Mm-hmm.
persisted and it's my own voice for
Right.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
what about you?
Yeah, so for me, I touched on it earlier, but it really came from my parents setting high expectations for me.
Hmm.
So that feeling of not good enough, and falling short of those expectations, which I then kind of, internalized.
Yeah.
And to your, uh, very similar in the sense that, accomplishments and achievements became the norm,
Yeah.
and not being satisfied with, or just being satisfied in the present or being content with whatever you have. It's like, okay, what's the next goal? How can I chase that? Right. And you're constantly
Yeah.
chasing. And then you're obviously, when you do fall short, in my case, at least when I fall short, it's having that critical, self-talk, and that negativity that comes with it. So I think that's where a lot of for me, this one really, I've got a list of five here, but this one, the punishing ourselves through seeking perfectionism,
Yeah.
is definitely one that resonates with me because I'm probably my harshest critic. But then I think
Same.
by extension, that also kind of shows up in my external world, right? So I have these expectations very similar on other people. So then when they fall short, I have a hard time letting go.
Hmm.
So here, yeah, so we're going to touch on that. I think I struggle forgiving myself over times that I have self-sabotage opportunities and relationships in the past. Absolutely.
Yeah. I
We'll yeah,
can relate to that one.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So,
highly.
so that's kind of been my I guess story in that sense. But number three, kind of feeding into what we've already discussed, is really we betray ourselves on a regular basis.
Mm.
So I
Mm.
think, Pierre, in your sense, what I'm hearing is, I could be wrong, but there's that people pleasing aspect. right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then you almost abandon yourself because you're worried about being abandoned. So your fear of abandonment is causing you to abandon yourself, and then you're
Yeah.
betraying yourself in that sense, where hence where you have a hard time forgiving yourself because you're in this conflict. And I
Yeah,
think
for sure.
a lot of people experience that, right? And I think I do too, because fear of abandonment is real, right? Like it comes from my attachment style as a kid, having that anxious attachment where I am constantly worried about, or used to be worried about, being abandoned, and then I would bend over backwards, and then because I'm betraying myself, I just carry this resentment, not only towards myself but other people, and then I have that challenge of forgiving myself, and by extension forgiving others. So
Mm.
anyways, thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, I can relate to that. My experience is sort of interesting in that I I do find myself uh, I do find myself sometimes creating or not creating really firm boundaries,
Hmm. Yeah.
and then extending myself to help other people, and then losing sight of my own needs. But then sometimes I find quite frequently that I'll reach a point where I, um, hey, yeah, I love that. Coke right where yeah, and so, um, and so sometimes I find myself overshooting and then just sort of dropping the hatchet. And so in many ways, I've kind of um, one of the patterns that I've had also is to isolate my own needs, to not be aware of them. And then sometimes that will lead to, I Nate, sometimes that will lead to then isolating and creating very rigid boundaries with other people.
Mm,
And so I do think there is an element of seeking greater awareness to my own needs and the needs of uh, my needs in relation to other people, to ensure that I don't find myself overstepping in such a way as to extend an expectation onto someone else,
hmm.
to have the needs be made clear, to feel like they're important and um, and worthy of acknowledgement, and then seeking them in those relationships. I think generally I've had a tendency to sort of isolate my own needs and not even recognize that they're there, except
Hmm.
that they are. We all have
Right.
these needs within relationships in particular. Um, and so just noting the natural needs that are there may then allow us to seek them in relationship, not try to sabotage in important ways or underhanded ways to get what we might need. Perhaps not even to create these sort of what's been referred to as covert contracts around expecting someone else to give me that which is unspoken, that which I need, but I'm not saying.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting in that aspect of relationships. It's so easy to fall into that trap of codependency,
yeah,
where you're like, okay, I'm going to compromise my needs because I need to be validated or accepted because I don't want to be abandoned, and then you're
yeah,
constantly chasing that feeling while the resentment's building up in the back, right?
yeah,
So I mean, obviously there is an aspect of betrayal, not only to yourself but whatever relationship you're in, because you're not, I mean, you're not really showing up because you're not putting your needs at the forefront, nor are you expressing them in fear of being rejected. So, I guess, what does one do in that sense, and why does
yeah.
it become such a challenge to forgive ourselves when it's, it's kind of in the background, anyways?
Well, yeah, like I just think about how this shows up for most guys, and and I think many guys can relate to this. There is a sense of at least in traditional masculine ideology, that we have to have all of our shit figured out. That
Mm-hmm.
um, that perhaps we don't express needs, that they're invulnerable, or that they are expressions of vulnerability, and that the traditional expectation that we might place upon ourselves, that might be societally reinforced, is one of having everything figured out on our own,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore not even being attuned to the needs that we might have.
Right.
And so I think the times in which the times in which I've really screwed up, or I've looked back and thought I've screwed up really badly, I had some needs that I just didn't even recognize. And maybe I sought them in ways um, that didn't, that I, regret. And so even acknowledging that we have certain needs to
Mm-hmm.
be acknowledged,
Mm-hmm.
to be close to other people. We have needs for pride and joy and love and sex, and all of these things emerge for us, and they're natural. And sometimes we have needs and don't express them. And I think, or don't even know that they're there because we don't allow ourselves to. The at least for me, the perfectionist in me just assumes I ought to have it all together. And if I don't, any, if there's any sort of indication that I don't have it all together, then I'm not worthy of love. And so it just goes unacknowledged.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that probably that's been one of the first steps for me, to acknowledge um, that I'm human and I make mistakes. There are sometimes when I act um, based on what I know or based on what I need, and it hurts someone else or it hurts me. And acknowledging the feeling thereafter, the
Mm-hmm.
one of remorse, the one of sadness, the one of potential loss, and then accepting responsibility, recognizing what you might want to change from there, um, and making amends, whether that's to yourself or to other people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how we normally go through the process of forgiveness, especially toward other people. It's the challenge of accepting our own humanity that makes the self-forgiveness aspect so hard.
Mm-hmm.
So we also have to accept our apology. Else
Yeah.
we're in a pattern of going back and being angry or being resentful towards ourselves, or being um, ruminating over our past mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think so when speaking of needs, do you think there's also a fear of coming across as needy as a man when you're expressing your needs? Like, I know that's definitely been a challenge of mine. If I express my needs, do I come across as weak? Do I come
Mm-hmm.
across as needy? So that's definitely been a fear of mine. Um, yeah, I can
Hey, Joe.
agree with Joe here.
Hmm.
Control freak, yeah, absolutely. In a way, you want to control how you're perceived, rather than just being yourself and be content with that. And then it's really up to the other person how they want to view you. That's their choice. But you're
Yeah.
almost trying to manipulate how you want to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
So you play a role, you put on a mask, and then you you're mad at yourself for putting on a mask. Um, so yeah,
Yeah,
and not
bingo.
having and not having your own needs met.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I think too, my experience around feeling a need to have some control usually manifests in my sort of obsessing over things. or even compulsively doing things to kind of mitigate this feeling of being out of control. And that can be to relive the experience, to relive the mistake, to repeatedly dog myself in this very sort of controlled way because I can't undo the past. I can't control how someone else might see me, or perhaps what the outcome to my mistake was. And so I may find myself replaying it or really beating myself up as kind of a way to impart control where I feel otherwise out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. So then, we've kind of touched on it. But another item on the list was the reason we struggle to forgive ourselves is we have bitterness or pain from our past relationships, or based on how we were treated by other people in those relationships. So we obviously carry that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think the way I look at this, there's I mean, two things for me that jump out immediately. One of them is, what did I do? What was my role in being treated a certain way? Did I
Mm-hmm.
have boundaries? Did I invite that treatment based on how I showed up? Right. So if I wasn't expressing my needs, like we've discussed, then how can I expect the other person to understand? Or if I'm not setting boundaries, how do they expect other people to treat me any better? The other piece that jumps out is the bitterness and pain, which, again, this is easier said than done because I've struggled tremendously with it.
Yeah,
Is hanging on to that is obviously we're only creating that suffering for ourselves and
yeah,
suffocating ourselves, and letting go obviously has its own feeling of liberation and freedom that comes with it.
for
Obviously,
sure.
that's so out of the list, as I said, the perfection piece was the one that resonated for me, and this one resonated for me, and those are the two things that I've kind of set as my goals over the holidays to really work through and journal. But yeah,
Mm.
just want to get your thoughts on that and
Oh, I love
how
that.
that shows up. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, hmm. Yeah. I think the pain, acknowledging the painful experience that might be associated with um, with regret, with
Hmm.
guilt,
Yeah.
um, that just acknowledging the feeling separate, perhaps separate from even the experience. So usually there's some pain, there is sadness, there's anger, and and like most guys, I think I've had a tendency to also judge those experiences too as somehow unsavory. And so
Hmm.
I find myself in this pattern of judging myself. If I experience pain, I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling angry after having done something uh, for which I feel regretful, I will find myself then judging myself for even acknowledging pain or sadness because I'm also simultaneously beating myself up for being imperfect.
Hmm.
And those two create this friction where I have needs around just um, giving myself compassion around feeling sad or feeling angry or feeling in pain, but I don't allow myself to because I'm judging myself so harshly. Because the perfectionist in me, the person who wants to control this stuff, tells myself I should have done something differently. You're a fool for having messed up in the first place. And so I'm not in a position then to give myself what I need to get through, to work through pain and suffering, because I'm also creating more suffering by judging myself. And so I think just being able to isolate the experience of emotion from judgment, approaching it in a sort of accepting, non-judgmental way, allows just for the experience to be felt rather than suppressed only to create more pain. I think I do that like I don't often give myself the permission to just feel an experience. If it's sadness or anger over which I feel like I should have done something differently. I should have imparted some control that would have changed the course of history, or at least in my head would have. And therefore, I'm not allowed to feel sad or feel
Mm-hmm.
upset. And then ultimately, it just becomes this sort of cycle of rumination. And I think I want to join you on this one because I think this is probably an area where I do myself a disservice by beating myself up and not allowing myself to sort of acknowledge the pain or the sadness that might come from
Mm-hmm.
the experience. And so I think it feels like an important area of growth for me personally. It feels like a big area of growth that I sort of guide other guys toward in my work. At the same time, I'm pretty harsh on myself. I'm my harshest
Mm-hmm.
critic too. And so I think that I'm going to join you in this one
Yeah.
around giving myself a little bit of compassion and accepting the emotional experience that might emerge.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. We can hold each
Yeah.
other accountable.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate
No,
that one.
even just when you were sharing that, what jumped out to me was the should, right? The should, we tell ourselves after the fact that I should have known better. I should
Yep.
have done this. And if we did know better, we would have done differently,
Yeah,
right? And it's
exactly.
obviously, and like I said earlier, hindsight is, I mean, yeah, hindsight's very challenging because,
Hindsight is challenging.
yeah, for me, the way I look at it is like, I can't really ruminate on the past with hindsight, but what it can allow me to do is have better foresight. And then if I invite that again, then yeah, maybe I need to really look deeper in terms of, okay, what am I doing here? Why am I repeating this? What am I getting out of it? Rather than having
Yeah.
uh, negative dialogue and being harsh with myself. Um, so I think there is an aspect of when you do have that compassion, you're able to hold yourself accountable, um, and look at how you're repeating those behaviors rather than just kind of shaming yourself. And I think that, I mean, in terms of, there is also some positivity when it comes with guilt, right? If we didn't have guilt, or we didn't have that tendency to look back and want to do better, then we wouldn't be accountable. Then we wouldn't
Totally.
want to do better. So I think there is some positive. So we don't want to just make it sound like this is all negative,
Yeah, of course. Of
but it's
course.
finding that right balance. It's finding that balance in terms of, okay, yeah, I can be accountable, but not be harsh with myself. I shouldn't be, you know, being really hard on myself. So I'm just reading the comment. Yes, absolutely. Guilt brings accountability, awareness.
Yeah.
When I have shared my pain or regret with a loving, trusted friend, just the process of expressing it in the world instead just in my own is very relieving. Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've tried to do is maybe you don't need to be able to even tell that person what, for whatever reason, if you have fear of rejection or fear that you may they may not receive it, or if they're no longer in your life. Journaling is helpful. Writing a letter to them is helpful. Typing out an email, any of that form, I found
Yeah.
can be therapeutic. But yeah, so I just want to jump into the last one, which kind of is somewhat connected to everything we've discussed so far, but is the aspect of holding grudges against others or ourselves.
Hmm.
So very similar to everything we've talked about, but when you have that bitterness from past relationships, you may be holding a grudge or something someone did. And I think the same thing applies here, is you're only choosing that suffering for yourself by having that grudge, because whatever someone did, and most people are, very absorbed in their own life. They won't even know. They may not even recognize or have that awareness that perhaps they did something to upset you or hurt you. And just holding that grudge, we're bringing that suffering into our own lives, and obviously holding ourselves back, and not being able to move forward. But just wanted to put that out to you, Pierre, and get your
Yeah.
thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I also think, yeah, the holding of grudges feels, um, it feels
It's like an
pretty
aspect of
detrimental.
control. Yeah,
Yeah, it is. It
you're
is in
controlling it.
many
Yep.
ways, and they're not, mm, they don't really accomplish much. Thank you, Ron. We're thinking the same. They don't really end up accomplishing a whole heck of a lot. But
Right.
I think to points made earlier around uh, the the sharing of experiences with other people, the sense of community and humanity that comes about just with this awareness um, of the fact that we all make mistakes, uh, that we're all vulnerable in the same way. And I think this is especially true for men who might hold ourselves to a certain standard of superhumanity, recognizing that we are in a place of vulnerability, that in many cases it's the vulnerable experiences within us, it's the mistakes that we make and the movements forward that we make that actually make us better men, ends up
Hmm.
creating some acceptance of ourselves rather than sort of shirking away in corners of a community or shirking away in corners of our own heads. So getting it, sharing it with others, especially I think with other men, becomes really vital to moving forward, creating growth. I think a comment that was made too by Tyler a little bit earlier about the sense of guilt producing or facilitating responsibility is super important. I'd add to that, it allows us to facilitate a sense of empathy, that
Hmm.
our awareness to the mistakes we make, the compassion that we give to ourselves after making the mistake might also then allow us to then be more empathic to others when they make mistakes, to recognize um, we're all we're all guilty of doing things at some point or other that we regret, and being
Yep.
able to move forward in a way as to make amends, whether that is through um, direct apology or not. In some cases, there's nothing for which to apologize, except perhaps an apology to ourselves. Um, in many cases, there is an apology that needs to be made. Those are decisions that feel very personal and dependent upon the circumstances, um, but it's all part of moving forward and growing and recognizing too that at no point are we striving uh, for perfection, for the place of
Hmm.
not making mistakes. It is really striving for responding to our mistakes in a way that feels more respectful, more empathic.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for sharing the Tyler, your experience.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when it comes to grudges, I'm planning on making a post about it, but it's really understanding that don't let someone else's lack of awareness impact your journey, right?
Yeah,
So I'm gonna read a quote here. I'm reading 12 Rules for Life by
yeah,
Jordan Peterson, and he quotes Nietzsche. I think I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right,
yeah,
but basically here, what it says: distress, with whether psychic, physical, or intellectual, need not at all produce nihilism. That is the radical rejection of value, meaning, and desirability. such distress always permits a variety of interpretations.
Mm.
So, so yeah, what I wanted to share there is obviously things are going to happen to us. People are going to treat us a certain way. We're going to show up a certain way. It's all about our interpretation and how we view that as either evil or an opportunity to learn from it. So, yeah, just wanted to share that. I came
Yeah,
across that last night,
it's a good
and
quote.
it really resonated with me for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, like don't burn the house down just because um, you know, one bad thing happened. And though there is a sense of almost wanting to impose that control sometimes upon ourselves to sort of um, self-destruct when we've made a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think the self-destruction you can, even if you're holding a grudge, you're really consuming yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
Or
It's a
or
slow
if you're
burn.
absolutely, or if
Yeah.
you're hard on yourself, same thing, right? So I agree with that self-destruction. So I guess I mean that kind of covers a lot of the things that I wanted to
Yeah,
discuss.
it does.
But I think so we've shared all that, and just for everyone that's watching this or will be watching it later, I guess what I really want to leave people with, and I'll give you an opportunity here, but is spend that time over the holidays, if you'd like to reflect on where are the areas that you feel like you're being held back because of the inability to forgive yourself, and have that compassion and grace for yourself. Understand that we all are human, we all make mistakes, we're all figuring it out on a daily basis. There's no, like I said, instruction manual on life, and so are other people, whether you're in relationships with them, friends, acquaintances. Everyone's on their own journey of figuring it out, and we're obviously going to hurt people intentionally or unintentionally, but we need to just be kind to ourselves, and just have that grace and compassion. So I would like to kind of have that call to action for everyone to perhaps go into the holidays and really take that load off yourself, and going into 2022, just just be kind to yourself, and focus on the things that you're doing your best, and every day have that goal. So I don't
I
know,
love
Pierre,
that.
if you
I
yeah.
love that. I'd add to that that sharing in our own individual vulnerabilities with other people in our lives, while it can be scary, is in many ways very connecting.
Mm-hmm.
That it allows other people to share their own experiences, to not hide, to not feel like they're on their own. And so, whereas it can feel almost, almost like it would shine a light on your own sense of smallness or your own sense um, of uh, of vulnerability, it actually ends up creating a tremendous amount of shared strength.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think
Mm-hmm.
it increasingly, and this feels like an area, and I kind of mentioned that this to you quite often, this area of building connection as being so important. I think one of my areas of growth over the next year, or one of my areas of focus over the next year, is really around building community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is really done with being truly aware to our own areas of growth, to our own areas of, um, I've said this 100 times today, our own areas of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I think extending that invitation to be compassionate to yourself, to also allow other people to hear you, to see you, and for you to see them
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
really valuable. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd like to reiterate what Joe's put here. Absolutely, always
Yeah.
remind yourself of great things you're doing on a daily basis. Be grateful.
Huge.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We tend to focus on our weaknesses or areas where we may have failed rather than celebrating our successes
Totally.
alongside. So definitely, yeah. Uh, Encourage everyone to do that. Pierre, thank you for
Thank
again
you.
sharing this. No, this has been amazing. Thank you for sharing this space with me. I think this was our fifth live we've done over this last few months as we go towards the end of the year. So I'm looking forward to having more conversations with you and hopefully continue these lives in the new year. And want to wish you a peaceful and restful holiday season.
Thank you.
And then yeah, looking forward to chatting with you again here in the near future.
Likewise. Likewise. Be safe out there.
Yeah,
And if you
and
travel, safe travels to you.
thank
I
you.
hope
You
that
as
goes
well.
well. Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
and I want to pass
And
that on to everyone that's been watching. Thank you
yeah,
for your engagement today, and being part of this community that we've kind of started. So super grateful for everyone that
yeah.
comes in and watches us talk.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you all. All
All
right.
right.
Bye for
Take
now.
care.
Take care.